Capcom has been hiding references to its own games inside Resident Evil for decades, and almost nobody catches them. We're talking posters, arcade cabinets, full weapons, even entire crossover events. Today I'm breaking down every single cross-company reference in the franchise, and it starts with something you've definitely never noticed. Captain Commando poster. Here's a fun exercise. Next time you boot up a Resident Evil game, stop sprinting toward the next objective and actually look at the walls. Because Capcom has been decorating their horror environments with love letters to their own arcade catalog, and the Captain Commando poster is the perfect example. Captain Commando was a 4-player beat-em-up that launched in arcades back in 1991. The character himself rocks this over-the-top futuristic armor suit, all primary colors and sci-fi bravado. He was basically Capcom's mascot before the company realized they had better options, and his poster just exists in Resident Evil, hanging on a wall somewhere in a public space, blending in with every other piece of background clutter like it belongs there. Zero interactivity, zero gameplay function. You can't pick it up, scan it, or trigger a secret cutscene where Captain Commando drop-kicks a zombie. It's just a poster, doing poster thing, which is exactly what makes it the perfect starting point, because every reference we're about to cover falls somewhere on a spectrum. On one end, completely invisible background props that reward the 3 people who actually read the walls. On the other end, fully functional weapons and crossover events that fundamentally change how you play the game. The Captain Commando poster sits firmly at the invisible end. It's the kind of detail that makes you wonder how many other things you've walked past without a second glance. And the answer is a lot. But if you think a poster is a deep cut, wait until you see what Capcom did with an entire arcade cabinet. Star Gladiator Arcade Cabinet. Now, if you thought Captain Commando was obscure, buckle up, because tucked into the background of certain Resident Evil environments is an arcade cabinet for Star Gladiator, and I can almost guarantee you've never heard of it. Star Gladiator was Capcom's 1996 3D fighting game set in a sci-fi universe featuring intergalactic warriors. It was Capcom's attempt to break into the 3D fighting space during the mid-90s arcade boom, and it actually pioneered some genuinely interesting mechanics that would influence later Capcom fighters. But here's the thing, almost nobody remembers it. The cabinet shows up blended into recreational spaces within RE's world, just sitting there like any other piece of background furniture. You can't play it. You can't interact with it in any meaningful way. At best, examining it might give you a minor audio cue. That's it. That's the whole reference. And there's something genuinely charming about that. Capcom essentially placed an advertisement for a game that 99% of their audience has never heard of, in a location where 99% of players will never look closely enough to notice. It's like hiding a business card inside a wall during construction. Nobody's finding that. But someone at Capcom knew it was there, and that was enough. What makes this fun is what it implies about the RE universe. If a Star Gladiator cabinet exists in Raccoon City, then Capcom's games exist as entertainment media within the Resident Evil world. Somewhere in this zombie-infested hellscape, a kid was playing Star Gladiator before everything went sideways, which is, not ideal. But if you think a forgotten arcade cabinet is a deep cut, wait until you see where Strider Hiryu's emblem shows up. Strider Hiryu's emblem. Here's something that makes zero sense on paper. Strider Hiryu is a cyborg ninja from the year 2048. He backflips off satellites, slices through robot dinosaurs, and moves like gravity personally offended him. Resident Evil is a game where you slowly open a door while something wet breathes on the back of your neck. These two franchises have absolutely nothing in common. And yet, Capcom went ahead and tucked Strider's geometric emblem into RE environments anyway. Walls, equipment, gear designs, just sitting there. A cybernetic ninja insignia chilling in a hallway full of biological nightmares. I don't know what to tell you. The emblem does nothing. Zero gameplay benefit. You can't interact with it. It doesn't unlock a secret, and it won't save you from the thing standing behind that door. It exists purely as a visual reward for the specific type of person who played a 1989 arcade game about a ninja fighting a Soviet grandmaster on a flying battleship, which is, a pretty narrow audience, but that's exactly how Capcom operates. They treat their games like a painter hides initials in a canvas, little signatures stamped into the background, invisible unless you know what you're looking for. The Strider emblem is basically Capcom writing their name on the wall and daring you to notice. Here's the thing though, the emblem's visibility actually shifts depending on your region and platform. Some versions have it sitting in plain sight, others bury it deeper into the environment, so depending on where you bought the game and what you're playing it on, on, you might have a completely different treasure hunt on your hands. But if you think a ninja emblem hidden in a zombie game is a weird tonal clash, wait until you see what Capcom did with a literal sun goddess wolf. Okami. Here's the thing. Okami is possibly the most visually beautiful game Capcom has ever made. We're talking about a 2006 masterpiece with a Japanese inkwash art style that looks like a living painting. Amaterasu, the white wolf sun goddess, uses a celestial paintbrush to restore life to a decaying world. And yet, despite being one of the most artistically ambitious games ever created, Capcom has never given it a proper Easter egg inside Resident Evil. That absence is actually kind of loud. Capcom loves hiding references to their own catalog inside Resident Evil games. Street Fighter, Mega Man, Devil May Cry, they all get nods. But Okami? Nothing. The white wolf deity who literally paints the world back to life gets zero representation in the franchise that loves stuffing references into every corner of its environments. And it's not like Okami is forgotten by Capcom entirely. Amaterasu has shown up in Marvel vs. Capcom 3, appeared as a crossover in Monster Hunter, and even got an HD remaster in 2017. Capcom clearly knows the game has a passionate fan base. They just haven't bridged the gap between celestial inkwash mythology and industrial bioweapon horror, which, fair enough, the aesthetic whiplash would be insane. Okami's entire visual identity is built on elegance, mythology, and artistic expression. Resident Evil is built on grimy decay, biological horror, and survival desperation. These two worlds have absolutely nothing in common except the Capcom logo. Maybe that's exactly why the crossover hasn't happened. Some things are too tonally different to smash together, even as a background prop. But honestly, a small Amaterasu figurine sitting on a dusty shelf in some save room would be perfect. Capcom, if you're listening, make it happen. At least Okami gets acknowledged somewhere in Capcom's crossover history, unlike the next reference, which is literally just a pair of underwear, Arthur's boxers. Up until now, every reference we've talked about has been something you walk past. A poster on a wall, a cabinet in the corner, something you notice, go, oh, neat, and move on with your life. But Capcom decided that wasn't enough. They wanted you to stop looking at references and start wearing them, and they chose the most ridiculous possible outfit to kick that off. In select Resident Evil titles, you can unlock Arthur's boxer shorts from Ghosts and Goblins as a full cosmetic costume. Your protagonist strips down to nothing but red underwear and fights bioweapons like that's a completely normal thing to do. For anyone who didn't grow up feeding quarters into arcade machines, here's the context. In the original 1985 Ghosts and Goblins, Arthur starts in full knight armor. Every time he takes a hit, a piece breaks off. Take enough damage and the guy is literally battling demons in his boxers. It's one of the most iconic visual gags in gaming history, and it's been a running joke across Capcom titles for nearly 4 decades. Now transplant that energy into Resident Evil. You're creeping through a dimly lit hallway. Something is growling behind a door. The music is building, and your character is standing there in bright red underwear like he just got locked out of his apartment. The tonal whiplash is genuinely incredible. There's a tyrant charging at you, and you look like you just rolled out of bed. The costume does absolutely nothing mechanically. Zero stat changes, zero advantages. It exists purely to make the most terrifying moments in survival horror look completely absurd, and unlocking it isn't easy either. You typically need significant campaign completion or specific achievement milestones, which means you have to earn the right to look that stupid. But if running around in your underwear feels like peak Capcom absurdity, wait until you see what they did with a certain photojournalist, Frank West Photo. Frank West has covered wars, you know. He's also covered zombie outbreaks, mall sieges, and roughly 10,000 creative ways to kill the undead with a shopping cart and a lawnmower. So naturally, Capcom decided he deserved a little acknowledgement inside their other zombie franchise, the one that takes itself considerably more seriously. Here's what makes this reference work so well. Frank West isn't just some random Capcom character shoved into a background. His entire identity revolves around photography. The guy's defining gameplay mechanic across the Dead Rising series is literally taking pictures of zombies, survivors, and everything in between. So when he shows up in Resident Evil through a photographic reference, it feels thematically earned rather than forced. A photographer being referenced through a photograph, sometimes the simplest connections are the cleanest. But the real beauty here is the tonal contrast. Dead Rising is a franchise where you can duct tape a machete to a broom and call it a weapon. where you fight psychopaths dressed as clowns in a food court, where the zombie apocalypse is basically an excuse to commit creative retail violence. Resident Evil, meanwhile, treats its zombie outbreaks like genuine extinction-level biological catastrophes with government conspiracies, corporate espionage, and enough body horror to fill a medical textbook. These two franchises could not be more different in tone, and yet they share the same conceptual DNA: zombies, survival, Capcom. The Frank West reference quietly acknowledges that connection without pretending these universes actually overlap. It's a wink, not a handshake. Nobody's suggesting Frank would last 5 minutes against a tyrant. He'd probably try to take a selfie with it and get folded in half, which is, not ideal. What elevates this beyond a simple Easter egg is that it bridges Capcom's two approaches to the same genre. One plays it straight, one plays it for laughs, and both are better for existing alongside each other. Frank documented the absurd. Resident Evil documents the terrifying. Same job, wildly different resumes. But if you think a photograph is a subtle way to connect franchises, wait until you see what happens when Capcom gets under your skin. Literally, under the skin. So up until now, every reference we've talked about has been something hidden inside Resident Evil. Another Capcom franchise sneaking into the horror game as a costume, a weapon, a poster on a wall. But this one flips the entire concept on its head. Because in 2004, Capcom took Resident Evil's most terrifying creation and dropped him into one of the goofiest games ever made. Under the Skin is a PS2 game where you play as a little alien named Cosme who disguises himself as humans and pranks people to collect coins. It's cartoonish, it's colorful, it's the kind of game where you're turning people into frogs and stealing their lunch money. There is 0% chance you've heard of this game unless you were the one specific kid at your local Blockbuster who grabbed the weird box art instead of GTA. But here's where it gets interesting. Under the Skin features a full Nemesis-themed level. That's right, the 8-foot-tall bioweapon who spent all of Resident Evil 3 screaming stars and chasing Jill Valentine through Raccoon City shows up in a game about an alien doing pranks. He's adapted into Under the Skin's comedic gameplay systems, meaning Nemesis. The creature that traumatized an entire generation of horror fans is now operating within the logic of a cartoon. It's like putting a great white shark in a ball pit. Technically, it fits. Emotionally, something has gone very wrong. What makes this reference genuinely notable is the direction. Capcom didn't just put other franchises into RE, they also pulled RE out and transplanted it into completely different genres. Nemesis, in a comedy game, proves that Capcom's cross-franchise philosophy wasn't a one-way street. It flowed wherever they felt like sending it. Tone be damned. But if you think putting Nemesis in a comedy game is a strange crossover, wait until you hear about the franchise that shared actual DNA with Resident Evil from the very beginning, Dino Crisis. This one hurts, and I mean that genuinely. Regina from Dino Crisis shows up as a fully unlockable costume in certain Resident Evil titles, letting you swap your protagonist's look for her tactical military gear and play through the entire campaign dressed as a character from a franchise that Capcom has left to rot for over 20 years. You keep all your standard RE abilities and mechanics. Nothing changes gameplay-wise. You just look like Regina now, which is, not ideal for your emotional health if you're a Dino Crisis fan. Here's the thing. Dino Crisis launched in 1999 and shared so much DNA with Resident Evil that people literally called it Resident Evil with dinosaurs. Same survival horror framework. Same resource management tension, same fixed camera angles in the original, same director in Shinji Mikami. These weren't distant cousins, they were sisters. Regina's appearance in RE isn't some random crossover pulled from the depths of Capcom's back catalog. It's a family reunion, one where only half the family is still alive. Unlocking the costume typically requires hitting specific completion milestones or achievement conditions, so Capcom makes you work for it. They reward dedicated players with acknowledgement of a franchise that hasn't seen a new entry since Dino Crisis 3 in 2003. Let that sink in. 2 decades of silence. No remake, no reboot, no spiritual successor, just Regina showing up occasionally in someone else's game like a ghost at a dinner party. And that's what makes this reference simultaneously the most heartwarming and most frustrating one on this list. Capcom clearly remembers Dino Crisis exists. They put effort into recreating Regina's look. They tied it to achievement rewards. This isn't neglect through ignorance. This is a company looking directly at a beloved franchise, nodding, and then walking away. Every time Regina Gina appears in an RE title, it's Capcom saying, yeah, we know without ever saying, and we're bringing her back. But if you think borrowed costumes from dormant franchises sting, wait until you see what happens when Capcom's biggest fighting game icons show up in a zombie apocalypse. Ryu and Chun-Li outfits. Street Fighter is the crown jewel. It's the franchise that put Capcom on the map, the one that basically invented competitive fighting games as we know them, and arguably the most recognizable gaming brand the company has ever produced. So when Ryu's white gi and red headband show up as an unlockable costume in a Resident Evil title, that's not just a cute nod. That's Capcom deploying the big guns. And Chun-Li's right there with him. The blue chi-pow, the signature hair buns, the whole look. Both costumes have appeared across multiple RE titles, letting protagonists swap their tactical gear for full-on fighting game attire. Some titles made them available through seasonal events or promotional windows, with availability bouncing around depending on your platform and region, which is, you know, not ideal if you're trying to collect everything. But here's what makes these costumes so uniquely entertaining. Ryu can shatter a car with his bare fists. He throws literal fireballs from his palms. Chun-Li can kick a man into the stratosphere. These are characters built around the fantasy of absolute physical dominance. They don't need weapons, they don't need healing items, they are the weapon. And then you put their outfits on a Resident Evil protagonist and suddenly Ryu is crouching behind a dumpster, desperately mixing green herbs together because a single zombie grabbed him funny. Chun-Li's signature spinning bird kick has been replaced with, please God let me find shotgun shells. The contrast between Street Fighter's power fantasy and RE's vulnerability fantasy is genuinely hilarious. You look like you could roundhouse kick a tyrant through a wall. You cannot. You have 4 pistol rounds and a prayer. That's the magic of these costumes. They don't change how the game plays. They change how the game feels. You're wearing the skin of a world warrior while experiencing the exact opposite of what a world warrior would ever experience. It's Capcom's most iconic franchise meeting its most hostile one, and the result is a character who looks like they should be winning a tournament, but is instead getting chased down a hallway by a man in a trench coat. But if Street Fighter represents Capcom's commercial peak, the next reference comes from a franchise born directly out of Resident Evil's own DNA, Dante's Legacy. Every other reference on this list is a wink, a costume here, a poster there, a fun little nod between franchises that exist in the same corporate family. This one is different. This one is a birth certificate. Devil May Cry started life as Resident Evil 4. That's not a fan theory. That's not speculation. That's documented Capcom development history. Hideki Kamiya was directing what was supposed to be the next mainline Resident Evil game, and during development, his vision kept drifting further and further from survival horror. The combat got faster, the protagonist got cooler, the enemies got more supernatural. At some point, Capcom looked at what Kamiya was building and basically said, this is awesome, but this isn't Resident Evil. So they spun it off into its own franchise. Devil May Cry launched in 2001, and the rest is gaming history, which means every single time a Dante-inspired costume shows up in a Resident Evil game, every gothic leather coat, every supernatural weapon aesthetic, every visual nod to DMC's Baroque action style, Capcom isn't just referencing another franchise, they're referencing their own alternate timeline. They're pointing at a game that literally used to be the one you're playing right now. Here's the thing, this connection also explains something players have debated for years. When Resident Evil 4 finally did come out in 2005, it was dramatically more action-oriented than any previous entry. The camera pulled in closer, the combat got tighter, the pacing shifted toward intensity over atmosphere, and people wondered why? The answer is sitting right there in the development history. RE4's DNA was already entangled with what became Devil May Cry. The action-focused design philosophy that birthed DMC didn't just disappear when Kamiya's project got reassigned. It bled back into the franchise it came from. That's what makes this the most meaningful reference on the entire list. It's not a crossover, it's not an Easter egg, it's a family tree. 2 franchises that share literal developmental DNA, and every Dante reference in Resident Evil is Capcom quietly acknowledging that these 2 series were once the same game. One just chose demons, and the other chose zombies. But if you think shared DNA between 2 Capcom franchises is impressive, wait until you see what happened when Resident Evil crossed over with Monster Hunter World. Because that wasn't a costume, that was a full-scale event. A Monster Hunter World. Every reference we've covered so far has been a visual nod. A costume here, a poster there, maybe a weapon if Capcom was feeling generous. Monster Hunter World said, forget all that, and built an entire boss fight. In November 2019, Capcom launched a limited-time collaborative event between Monster Hunter World's Iceborne expansion and the Resident Evil 2 remake. And this wasn't some lazy reskin job. They took the Teaser Zero, better known as Mr. X, one of the most iconic enemies in horror gaming history, and dropped it into Monster Hunter's hunting framework as a fully functional monster encounter, with unique attack patterns, custom damage thresholds, and multiplayer scaling designed for full hunting teams. Here's the thing. The Tyrant in Resident Evil is a creature you're supposed to run from. It's an unstoppable pursuer. The entire design philosophy is, you cannot kill this thing, so stop trying. Now translate that into a game where the entire point is killing things cooperatively with oversized weapons. That's a fascinating design problem, and Capcom actually solved it. They had to rebuild the Tyrant's behavior from the ground up, giving it tells, windows, stagger states, all the mechanical language Monster Hunter players understand, while still making it feel like the relentless Nightmare RE fans recognized. The result was a boss that genuinely felt threatening in a game where players routinely slap dragons around with guitars. But the event didn't stop at the fight itself. Players who completed the encounter earned Resident Evil themed armor sets and weapon cosmetics, letting hunters permanently equip gear bearing RE's aesthetic long after the collaboration ended. Your character could walk around the Monster Hunter hub looking like they just crawled out of Raccoon City, which is, you know, a fashion choice. The collaboration window lasted roughly 1 month. That's it. If you missed it, you missed it. And that urgency drove massive player engagement, with hunters who'd never touched a Resident Evil game suddenly learning about the franchise through a 20-minute boss fight. Capcom essentially turned a crossover event into a marketing campaign that players thanked them for. This was real development resources, real design work, real mechanical integration between two completely different gameplay philosophies. Not a costume swap, not a background poster, a full-scale collaborative event that required both franchises to meet in the middle. But even Monster Hunter World's fully developed boss encounter isn't the deepest Capcom has gone with cross-franchise integration, because one reference didn't just give you a fight to complete, it gave you a weapon to keep, the Mega Buster. Every single reference we've covered so far has something in common. You look at it, you wear it, you notice it on a wall or unlock it as a costume. They're all things that exist around you while you play Resident Evil. The Mega Buster is the one you shoot zombies with. In Dead Rising, Mega Man's iconic arm-mounted cannon is a fully functional, fully equipable weapon. Not a skin, not a reskin of an existing gun with a blue coat of paint. An actual weapon with its own firing behavior and damage output, pulled directly from the Mega Man franchise. You aim the thing, it fires energy projectiles that deal real damage to whatever zombie horde is unfortunate enough to be standing in front of you, and Frank West gets the full Mega Man outfit to go with it, turning a photojournalist in a mall into a walking Capcom legacy tribute. Here's the thing, they don't just hand you this for showing up. Unlocking the Mega Buster requires defeating a massive number of zombies, meaning Capcom gated their ultimate crossover reward behind genuine dedication. You have to earn it. And when you finally get it, the weapon actually changes how you approach the game. Do you bring the Mega Buster into the fray, or stick with baseball bats and chainsaws? No other reference on this entire list creates anything close to that kind of choice. Mega Man debuted in 1987. The Mega Buster has been his defining weapon for nearly 4 decades, making it arguably the single most iconic piece of Capcom hardware ever created, and they transplanted it directly into a zombie action game where it functions as a genuine combat tool. The energy blast effects are faithful. The outfit is faithful. They adapted everything to fit Dead Rising's weapon framework without stripping away what makes it feel like the Mega Buster. And that's really what makes this the perfect ending point. Because when you zoom out and look at everything we've covered, from boxer shorts hidden in a menu to an arcade cabinet nobody notices to Street Fighter costumes, to a full Monster Hunter collaboration event, they all come from the same impulse. Capcom loves its own history. Every poster, every costume swap, every limited time event, and every functional weapon pulled from a completely different franchise exists because somebody at that company looked at their back catalog and said, yeah, let's put that in there. The Mega Buster is just the purest expression of that instinct, not a reference you observe. A legendary weapon you hold in your hands and fire at the undead. A 1987 arm cannon doing real work in a zombie-infested shopping mall. I don't know what to tell you. Capcom just built different. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.